Right. Good evening and welcome to Crawley Borough Council's Planning Committee meeting of 29th June 2020. I am Councillor Malik, Chair of the Planning Committee. The agenda for this meeting has been published and is available on the Council's website. The committee will be considering 3 planning applications this evening, and I propose to deal with those applications in the order that they appear on the agenda. There are no in-person public speaking rights at this virtual planning committee. However, members of the public wishing to make representations on the applications before the committee have submitted written statements in advance of the meeting. This also applies to ward councillors. These written statements will be read to the committee by the Democratic Services Officer. Can I ask the Democratic Services Officers and the legal officers supporting the meeting to introduce themselves, giving their name and job title?
Apologies, Democratic Services Officer, Mes Matthews.
Is that Mes? Hello? Oh.
Yes. Hello, Councillor Burgess.
Oh, sorry, I've got my mic on, I think.
Okay, if you could just bear with us, we're just doing introductions at the moment.
Right, okay.
Jess Hampton, Democratic Services Support Officer.
Anne-Maria Brown, Head of Legal, Democracy and HR.
Thank you. Before I invite members of the Planning Committee to confirm their attendance, I ask that they please ensure their mobile phones are switched off or on silent. Their backgrounds are plain or nondescript, and that they will not be disturbed during the meeting. Committee members are reminded that they should have their microphones turned off unless speaking, and their cameras turned off unless they are speaking or requesting to speak. Moving on to our first item of the agenda, apologies. Have we received any apologies for absence?
We've received no apologies this evening, Chair.
No apologies, thank you. We will now be taking introductions together with item 2, 3 and 4. Please can I ask committee members, when called upon, to confirm their name and the ward they represent, if they have any declarations of interest to make, if they have any lobbying declarations to make, if they agree with the minutes of the meeting of the Planning Committee held on 27th of April 2020, and if they have visited the site any of the applications.
Okay, Councillor Ashcroft.
Good evening. So Councillor Liam Ascoff for Gossip Green and North East Broadfield. I have no interests. I have received emails on item number 6 and nothing else. I approved the minutes of the last meeting, and I have made site visits to items number 6 and 7.
Councillor Andrew Belbin.
Good evening. I have visited items 5. Sorry, I'll start again. Councillor Andrew Belbin representing Mount Hill South and Worth. I have visited items 5, 6 and 7. I have been lobbied on item 7. I wish to declare that I have a non-prejudicial interest in item 7, in that 2 lobbyists are known to me, but this will not prejudice my thoughts on this item. And I agree the minutes of the 27th of April. Thank you.
Councillor Hart. Councillor Hart, can you please turn your camera on?
Yes, I have. Yes, good evening, Councillor Hart, Councillor for Ifield and Ifield West. I have no declarations of interest, no lobbying declarations, and I confirm the minutes of the last meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Irvine? Councillor Irvine, could you turn your microphone on, please?
Right, okay. Councillor Ian Irvine, representing Broadfield. I have no personal interest. I have a lobbying declaration on item 6. I've also conducted a site visit on item 6, and I agree with the minutes of the last meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Jaggard?
Good evening. Councillor Kim Jaggard from Maidenbower. I have no interest in any of the applications. I haven't been lobbied. I agree with the minutes of the last meeting, and I have visited all of the application sites. That's 5, 6 and 7. Thank you.
Councillor Johans, could you please turn your camera on?
Hi, yes, Councillor Gurinder Johns, representing Northgate and West Green. I have no interest to declare and have not been lobbied on any of the items. Approve the minutes, and I have conducted a site visit on agenda item 7.
Thank you. Councillor Malik?
Thank you. Councillor Shehzad Malik from Langley Green and Tushmore Ward. No declaration of interest to make. Been lobbied on item number 6. And I agree with the minutes of the Planning Committee meeting held on 27th of April. And I have visited Lundy Close, the agenda item number 6. Thank you.
Councillor McElhaney?
Councillor Tom McElhaney, Langley Green and Tushmore. I have nothing to declare, and I approve the minutes.
Thank you. Councillor Magali, if you could turn your camera on, please.
Hi, Councillor Maureen Magali from Tilgate. I have no interest to declare. I approve the minutes for the 27th of April. I have visited site on item number 5. I have not been lobbied or no declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Purdy?
Good evening, Councillor Jonathan Purdy, representing Three Bridges. I wish to declare an interest in respect of item 7, as I am a member of the Hazelwick Road Conservation Area Advisory Committee. I have also been lobbied on item 7. I have visited, made site visits to, in respect of items 5 and item 7, and I agree the minutes of the last meeting held on Monday, 27th of April. Thank you.
And Councillor Smith?
Peter Smith, Ifield and Ifield West. I have no disclosures of interest for this meeting or lobbying declarations, and I agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of April.
Thank you. For record purposes, we have Councillors Mullins, Sharma and Brenda Burgess. They're present in the meeting, but they have no speaking rights.
Thank you. The committee agrees that the minutes of the meeting of Planning Committee held on 27th of April 2020 are an accurate record of the meeting. Thank you all. We will now move on to the first planning application of tonight. Agenda item number 5, planning application CR/2019/0589/FUL, Sullivan Drive, Bewbush, Crawley. Please, can I ask the planning officer to introduce themselves and present the report to the committee?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Jean McPherson. I'm the Group Manager for the planning team here at Crawley, and I'll be presenting this first item. Thank you. Agenda item 5 is in Sullivan Drive in Bewbush. This application was discussed by the Planning Committee at its meeting in January, when it resolved to grant planning permission subject to the conclusion of a Section 106 legal agreement. Just to refresh you on the application site details, this site is part of Bewbush West playing field. And from the CBC side, it can be accessed off Sullivan Drive. You see my cursor, you can see where the roundabout is on Sullivan Drive. The land comprising the application amounts to around 0.17 hectares and is shown on the slide and crosses the administrative boundaries of Crawley and Horsham. Again, where my cursor is now, you can see roughly where the administrative boundary is. The application was for a single track bus gate, shown here, and a new pedestrian and cycle path linking Kilnwood Vale on the left hand side with Bewbush on the right hand side of the screen. The purpose of the legal agreement was to secure an appropriate tree mitigation, as 28 trees were being lost from the development to make way for the bus gate. The tree mitigation calculation, which is set out in your policy CH6, required the planting of 53 replacement trees. The plans shown to the committee in January showed only 34 replacement trees, hence the need for the legal agreement as off-site payment in lieu of the shortfall of 19 trees. So since January, the applicants have been working with officers on improving the landscaping along the bus gate. Several amended plans have been submitted and discussions have taken place with the CBC tree officer and others about appropriate planting. An amended plan, which is on the screen now, is now proposed, which can provide 59 replacement trees within the Crawley Borough Council boundary. Most of the additional trees are on the northern side of the bus gate, providing a more landscaped boundary to the playground and the park beyond. The tree species and form have been considered to provide a mixture of trees along the bus gate, some taller and others shorter, which planted together would provide a more effective screen to the houses in Manor Fields. The revised landscaping plan is considered acceptable in terms of tree numbers and species, and officers consider that the approach to providing the tree mitigation on site is not only in line with policy CH6, but preferable to the off-site payment in lieu. The officer recommendation is to permit the application as set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any statements submitted by members of the public?
We have one statement which has been submitted by Mr. Sorry, Jess, could you just turn your microphone on, please? Thank you.
Apologies. We have one statement on this application which has been submitted by Mr. Jim Bevan, who is an associate planner at Savills, the planning agent for this application. Good evening, Chair and members. As set out in the officer's presentation, and as you will recall, the Planning Committee resolved to grant planning permission for the construction of a bus gate at Kilnwood Vale back in January of this year, subject to the completion of a Section 106 to secure off-site tree planting. In the intervening time between the committee's previous resolution and this evening's committee meeting, the applicant has been working with the council to agree an increased level of on-site tree planting in order to remove the need for a Section 106 agreement. Discounting the replacement trees proposed within Horsham District, the amended scheme now proposes 59 replacement trees within the Crawley Borough Council boundary, which is 6 more than the required 53 replacements when calculated against policy CH6. In discussion with the Council, the proposed species mix has also been amended to include a greater proportion of native species. Most notably, the Utilis jacomonti trees have been swapped out for native silver birch. The shrub planting is a mix of native species selected for their fast growth rate and mixed appearance with good screening qualities. This planting comprises dogwood, hazel, Gelder rose and spindle, which are anticipated to achieve close to 3 metres height within 3 years. Individual trees are provided to offer immediate eye-level screening with a swathe of native shrub mix ultimately intended to fill between ground level and the canopy of the trees, planted throughout. The natural, informal combination has been designed to provide a varied appearance with year-round interest as part of the broader open space. The full details of the hard and soft landscaping will be submitted for the Council's approval under Condition 7. However, it has been demonstrated in discussion with the Council that an acceptable landscaping scheme can be accommodated wholly on land owned and controlled by the applicant and within the Crawley Borough Council boundary. It is respectfully requested that the committee follows the officer's recommendation and permits the scheme without the need for a Section 106. Thank you for your time. End of statement.
Thank you. The process for consideration of application at this meeting will be as follows. Any committee member wishing to speak should turn on their camera. This will signify to the Democratic Service Officer your request to speak. You will then be invited to speak one by one. When you are called on to speak, please unmute your microphone. Check that your screen is surrounded by a red box before speaking. Please turn off your camera and microphone when you are finished and are no longer live. Once all committee members that wish to speak have done so, the planning officer will respond to any queries. We will now begin consideration of the application. Please turn on your camera if you wish to speak.
Councillor Jaggard.
Thank you. Very welcome that we've got more trees going in there because it was a concern. I'd just like to ask about the what's labelled a little red square called 3A on the plan. Is that the camera, the CCTV camera that is going to be ANPR checking the bus route? Because I am still very concerned that is very close and may obscure the view of the riders who are exiting the change in bridle path. I know this is not part of this application, but I thought it was going to be addressed at some point, yet it is still on this new plan where it was originally right in front of the bridle path entrance. If that could be clarified, please.
Councillor Purdy.
Good evening, thank you. Just really a question for Jean Kirkpatrick. I'm pleased to see with one hand that the scheme can be accommodated entirely within the land of owned by the applicant. I just wanted to confirm that our team at the council were comfortable that we're now not cramming sort of too many trees into this space, and not what we're going to end up with is obviously a dense screen, but a satisfactory one in terms of tree growth, and not needing to or not wanting to spread it out a little further. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, if I could just bring back Jean McPherson, the planning officer, to answer those comments. Thank you, Jean.
thank you. In terms of the little pink icon 3A, 4A, 5A, that key actually signifies positioning of a lamppost rather than the ANPR cameras. The ANPR cameras are proposed to be agreed, the precise details of those, through a condition attached to the report. So they say those pink blobs are lampposts. And in regard to the sort of density of the tree planting, Councillor Purdy rightly raised that, and it was something I have spent quite a while talking with the tree officer about, and whether they were too close. But what you will see from the image that's on the screen is there's a variety of tree species here that grow to slightly different heights and have slightly different habits in terms of growth. Some are sort of shrubby and some are sort of more upright. And he feels that actually the planting distances are in line with the sort of arboricultural standard and doesn't have any concerns about those. So they should all mature to a reasonable degree and provide an effective screen. Thank you.
Okay, we have Councillor Ian Irvine wishing to speak.
Thank you, Chair. If we've got to the end of questions, I don't really have any questions. I just wanted to say that I think a very good job has been done on this all round, and I'd be very happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you all the. Sorry, Councillor Smith, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was happy to second, Chair.
Thank you. So as we have already had the recommendation, we are moving to the vote now, but it was going to be a recorded vote on the application, and which will be taken by the Democratic Services Officer on behalf of the Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ashcroft.
4.
Councillor Belbin.
4.
Councillor Hart.
4.
Councillor Irvine. Sorry, could you turn your microphone on, please, Councillor Irvine? Sorry.
I will get the hang of this. 4.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Jaggard.
4.
Councillor Jahans.
4.
Councillor Malik.
4.
Councillor McElhaney.
4.
Councillor Mugale.
4.
Sullivan. Councillor Purdy.
4.
And Councillor Smith.
4.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Sorry, bear with me one moment. So the vote has been taken and it's unanimous 4 with 0 votes against and 0 abstentions on the recommendation.
Thank you. So the application number CR 2019-0589 FUL Sullivan Drive, Bewbush, Crawley has been permitted subject to the conditions set out in the report. Our next item on the agenda, item number 6, planning application CR 0020 FUL. It's 6 Lundy Close, Broadfield, Crawley. Please, can I ask the planning officer to introduce themselves and present the report to the committee?
Hello, I'm Hamish Walk. I'm a Principal Planning Officer in the Development Management team. The application is on a site at 6 Lundy Close in Broadfield. You can see the application site there. It's lined in red, although I suspect that's fairly faint, but if I just run the cursor around the outline, that's the application site. It currently forms part of the garden of number 6, and there's a garage and a shed alongside the existing house. There is a public footpath running along the side of the property, and then there's a public footpath along the rear of all this row of houses in Lundy Close as well. And as you can see from the site plan, numbers 8 to 14 Lundy Close, they're perpendicular to Lundy Close and their front elevations face towards the application site. You can also see there on the location plan there's a parking bay outside the site which accommodates 3 cars. This is the proposed site plan. So the proposal is for a single detached house, which is the building labelled 6A on that plan. As you can see, this site would be effectively cut in half. Number 6 would obviously remain with some of the existing garden area, but the bit to the northwest would form the garden area and curtilage for the new house at 6A. The footpaths obviously around the site would be retained. The application is also for a replacement garage for number 6, so the proposed house's location would affect the existing garage. So there's a proposal to put a new garage in that location there. So that's a photo of the front of the site. So on the right hand side there you can see the existing house at number 6. You can see the shed in its garden and the public footpath that runs along the northern boundary of the site. And then here you can see the location of numbers, that's numbers 8 and 10 Lundy Close. Numbers 12 and 14 are continue that row, but they're slightly set back so you can't see them in that view. As you can see, the site is currently largely enclosed by a close boarded fence. That's another view of the front. So again, you've got number 6 on the right hand side. You can see its existing garage there and the driveway into the site. And you can then see all 4 houses. That's 8, 10, 12 and 14 Lundy Close. Just in terms of design, I think it's worth just looking at the existing houses. So that's number 6 and it must be number 4, which are a pair of semi-detached houses, as you can see. They have an asymmetric roof, which you can see there, and some sizable front dormers, which are obviously part of the original design. And if I show you another view along the street, so that's a view, that's number 6, and you can see the row of houses with front dormer windows and the asymmetric roofs. So that is typical of Lundy Close. In fact, most of the houses have a very similar design. In terms of the application site itself, that's a view from within the site. So you've got number 6 on the left hand side there. It's a view towards the front of the site, So Lundy Close is just beyond that boundary fence, the parking area that you saw earlier, and numbers 8 to 14 are off to the right hand side. And that's the view from within the site, so you can see the shed, and that's the view of numbers 8 to 14 Lundy Close. And the footpath obviously runs along just the other side of that fence. That's the view of the footpath. And that's the view from the other end of the footpath, so just by Broadfield Brook, looking back towards Lundy Close, which is there. So on the right hand side here you've got 8 to 14 Lundy Close and the application sites on the left. And there's another shot taken from slightly further forward, so you can see numbers 8 and 10 Lundy Close and their relationship to the footpath and the application site. So this is the proposed layout for the site. So you can see numbers 8 and 10 there, and numbers 12 and 14 slightly set back. That's the proposed positioning for the new house. There'd be 2 parking spaces at the front of the site, and you can see a cycle store located alongside the house there, and the proposed replacement garage for number 6. These are the proposed plans and elevations. So you can see the ground floor layout there with the front entrance, moving into 2 rooms downstairs, a kitchen diner at the rear of the house and a living area at the front. Staircase going up to the first floor where there'll be 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. In terms of elevations, you can see that the proposal replicates the asymmetric roofs that are typical of the area and also has the large box front dormer. So in terms of the character of the area, I think there's been quite a lot of effort gone to match that. The one difference, obviously, it's worth pointing out, is that this is a detached house rather than semi-detached, which most of the other houses along the street are. This plan shows the proposed garage, so you can see they've marked the existing garage on that at the front there in red. That would be demolished. The proposed garage set further back into the site. You can see the elevations and the floor plan, so it's a simple flat roof design for the garage. And there'll be a parking area for an additional car in front of that. And then finally, in terms of plans, that's a tree protection plan. Sorry, you can't see that yet. Move on to the right screen. There you go. Tree protection plan. So there are some mature trees along the rear of the site, and so although the arboricultural officer is happy with the proposal, it's worth putting in a bit of protective fencing just to ensure that no damage to the tree roots occurs during any construction works. So if I just go back to the proposed site plan, just to cover some of the issues that have been raised. So you'll see from the report that we've had quite a number of objections, 7 objections, raising a number of issues. One relates to an area of land along this boundary here, which I think a year or 2 ago, I'm not sure quite when this happened, but there was a row of conifers, a kind of hedge of conifers along there. That has been removed, and a fence now runs along the boundary enclosing the garden area. So there were concerns raised about that, about the proximity of the house to neighbouring houses, and I would guess in particularly to numbers 8 and 10 Lundy Close, and the impact on those houses in terms of loss of views and outlook and potential overlooking. Some concerns about trees, impact on the street scene and design issues, concerns about the parking layout for the proposal, noise from construction, and a concern about increased risk of crime and antisocial behaviour from the proposal, and from perception there was some increased enclosure of the footpath. So just to run through the key issues in turn, I mean, in terms of the principle of the development, this is clearly a residential area. It would reuse some existing garden land, and in that sense the principle of development is considered acceptable. As I said, the design has been quite carefully worked up to reflect the character of Lundy Close in terms of the roof design, the materials, the detailing, and the incorporation of the front dormers. So we consider that it is sympathetic in terms of its relationship to the street scene and the design of the area. And obviously the garage is a very low-key building that is fairly well tucked away anywhere on the site, but is considered appropriate. In terms of our policies, we have obviously the policies on space standards, and the house would comply with the national space standards with a living area of 70.1 square metres. We also seek a garden area of 60 square metres, and both the proposed house, obviously here and wrapping around the side, and the existing house would retain garden areas of 85 and 88 square metres, so well in excess of the policy requirements there, and similar in terms of area to adjoining houses. The report addresses the relationship particularly of 12 and 14. This is in terms of impact on future occupiers of the proposed house. It is considered that relationship in terms of potential overlooking is acceptable. The windows are more than 12 metres away. Obviously you've got a boundary fence in the middle, and any views into that garden area would be pretty limited. So we think that impact is acceptable. There is no bin storage area shown, but I think we feel there's ample space to the side of the house to accommodate refuse bins, and then obviously to wheel them out to the front on collection day. So in terms of the proposal itself, we consider it is acceptable in terms of our standards for the future occupiers of that house. Turning to the neighbouring properties, and that clearly that's where a number of objections have come in from. The proposed house would be 10.9 metres at its minimum point, so from there to there, from number 8 Lundy Close. Obviously it's slightly angled away, and the numbers 12 and 14 are set back, so that distance increases. In terms of our urban design guide, that normally seeks a 10.5 metre separation in that kind of relationship, where you've got a relationship between in this case main front windows. It would, in terms of the design guide, it would more typically probably be the back windows and a side elevation of a house to the rear, but in this case it is to the front. So it's a little unusual in that sense, but it's the same distance that the design guide seeks, which is 10.5, so it does exceed that distance. I think officers would accept the outlook to some extent from numbers 8 and 10 will change. Clearly the house will be very visible from there, but the distance is considered to be acceptable and in accordance with our design guide. There are 2 windows proposed, one at ground floor and one at first floor in the side elevation. The ground floor would serve a kitchen and the first floor would serve a landing. And as you'll see when we come on to the recommendation, there is a recommended condition, or 2 conditions actually. One, that no more openings could be created in that side elevation, and secondly that the windows should be obscure glazed. You'll see from the relationship the new house would be to the south of the existing houses at 8 to 14, and to some extent it could cause some overshadowing. Obviously there is a gap between the dwellings, but the sun will come round, will rise over this side, swing round and set over here. So in the middle part of the day the house will cast a shadow in that direction, but I don't think it would be a significant one in terms of overshadowing of the windows, more likely to overshadow the front garden area. And obviously there are mature trees over this side which already must overshadow that garden area in the early morning. So overall, officers consider the relationship to numbers 8 to 14 to be acceptable, whilst recognising that there is a fairly close relationship between these properties here. In terms of number 6, to the other side, obviously this is the application dwelling. The house would clearly be visible from their rear garden because it's set back quite considerably from the back wall of this house. In this case, though, it's to the north, so there's no overshadowing impact on this rear garden area. And whilst the building would clearly be visible, we think that relationship is acceptable and is relatively common in urban areas where you get a staggered building line along a street. And then in terms of number 12, which is addressed in the report, that is on the opposite side of the road over here. We don't think there's any significant impact on that property. Just to pick up on one of the other issues that neighbours have concerned, which is about the risk of crime and possible antisocial behaviour, which I think is largely arises from the enclosure of this footpath. Now, in actual fact, that has already happened because there is a fence along here. I'm not sure when that was put in. It's not part of the current application. There is already a fence running around that boundary. It's been there for at least a year, possibly longer. So I think in that sense, the proposal doesn't really enclose the footpath anymore. To some extent, the windows, particularly the rear windows in the back of the proposed house, would offer potential for some additional overlooking and natural surveillance of the footpath. But I think as officers, we don't really feel there's no real evidence to suggest the house will have any impact one way or the other in terms of potential crime, whether it be to these houses or in terms of antisocial behaviour along the footpath. There are lampposts. There's a lamppost at the front here, and I think there's another one to the rear. So the footpath is relatively well lit. And then just dealing with a few other issues. So in terms of parking, we've had no objection from the Highway Authority. As you can see, number 6, as well as its garage, would have two additional parking on spaces on site, so a total of 3 spaces. The proposal is for the new house to share the driveway, so cars would come in here and then turn into the application site. And you can see there are 2 cars proposed to be parked to the front there. So that does comply with the standards in conjunction with the bicycle parking there. The applicant, following a request from the County Council, and I think this is something we'd like to see in future applications, a request for an electric vehicle charging point. The applicants have agreed to provide an electric vehicle charging point. And I think that's shown on the floor plan. Certainly we do have plans that show that. Then trees I've dealt with, and so I think finally sustainability. The water efficiency condition, although the application hasn't yet demonstrated it can comply with that, we are happy that can be secured by condition, and a sustainability statement has been submitted, so we think it's acceptable in sustainability terms. In terms of affordable housing, as one house we would expect a financial contribution. In this case it would be for £8,178, and the applicant has agreed to pay that. So in conclusion, we feel the proposal is acceptable, and the recommendation is for approval subject to a Section 106 agreement to secure that contribution towards affordable housing, and subject to the conditions that are set out in the report.
Thank you. Are there any statements submitted by members of the public?
We've received 5 statements on this application. I'll be reading them in the order in line with the Council's constitution. The first statement was included with some photographs, which I will share with the committee now. Okay. I believe that has shared the first image. So our first statement was submitted by Mr. D. Howard, a neighbour of 6 Lundy Close. I urge you all to refuse the application because of the following. 1. My front windows are perpendicular to the centre line of the proposed new property, which will block light equally left and right of my windows. 2. Visibility of bedroom floors of houses number 12 and 14 severely reduced from road, encouraging burglary. 3. Mental health could be affected with less light and a view of a brick wall from our windows. 4. Less light beside the stream, thus extending the dark length of existing footpath. 5. Noise would be increased outside our bedroom windows. And I will just share the other image that has been enclosed with this statement. Continuing, number 6, car access to the new property is via a shared driveway and then a direct left turn. After looking at the new site layout, it looks impossible to achieve in one movement considering a car's turning circle. 7. We know that the council initially owned the land for the proposed property, so when did the council allow ownership for number 6 as the location plan states? This was initially a green buffer area. I am disappointed that the owners of number 6 Lundy Close did not discuss their planning application with any of us before submitting it to the council. End of statement number 1. Statement 2 has been received from Mrs. B. Taylor Ginman and Mr. C. Ginman, also a neighbour of 6 Lundy Close. We would like to put in writing our strong objections to the erection of a 2-storey dwelling and garage at 6 Lundy Close. The building will impact greatly on our mental health. It will make our property very dark and deprive us of much needed light. We will all be looking at a large brick wall. It will affect our privacy as it will look directly into our bedroom windows. It will make the footpath in front of our houses dark, encouraging crime, e.g. mugging and burglaries. It will also increase noise, especially with the car parking situation. It will ruin the appearance of the close to the detriment of everyone. End of statement 2. Statement 3 was received from Mrs. G. Mallet, also a neighbour of 6 Lundy Close. The land at the side of number 6 was originally a public space. The boundary fence has been gradually moved out and the last move was as recent as late last year. We have copies of our deeds showing the boundary lines to support this statement. Page 16, paragraph 5.17 of the report states that some overshadowing will occur from the new build. This would restrict our access to natural daylight. It also states that our houses are overshadowed by the trees along Broadfield Brook. This is not the case at all. We do not have any shadows or lack of light from these trees. Paragraph 5.10 is more concerned about the privacy of the new build, but no concern about number 8 overlooking the parking of 5 cars. This is including the 3 bays that are used by the owners of numbers 8 to 14. And also, is it viable to have 5 cars parked in close proximity to houses? There is also no concern about the outlook and close proximity to the front of the property of number 10. Paragraph 5.21 states that the proposed building would enclose the public footpath, but there is a gap of 12 metres between the house and the footpath. It doesn't point out that the boundary fence has also been put less than half a metre from the footpath. In my opinion, this planning application hasn't given any consideration to the occupants of properties number 8 to 14 to include loss of light, lack of parking spaces. The parking bays for numbers 8 to 14 will be lost, and as we are on a bend, there is no safe alternative parking, and safety of the environment, and also the taking of the land that was originally meant for a public space. End of statement number 3. Statement number 4 in this application comes from Mr. and Mrs. Wise, who are the applicant for this application. This statement is in support of the proposed erection of 2-bedroom detached house next to 6 Lundy Close, Broadfield, Crawley. With regard to the boundary of our property, the boundary is clearly marked on the deeds of the property and the council provided plan is additional evidence for this. Also, according to the guidelines sent to us, this is a non-relevant issue. With regard to the close proximity to neighbouring houses, the design complies with recommended urban SPD guidelines of 10.5 metres between properties as it is located 10.9 metres away from numbers 8 to 14 Lundy Close. With regard to loss of light, given the separation distance and that these dwellings are already overshadowed by the canopies of the existing trees along Broadfield Brook, the proposed dwelling is not considered to cause a significant detrimental impact on the amenities of these properties. Also, according to the guidelines sent to us, this is a non-relevant issue. With regard to overlooking from the windows resulting in a loss of privacy, the proposed dwelling would face the eastern side boundary and rear garden areas of number 12 Anglesey Close. However, it would be separated from this property by a road and a distance of over 21 metres. Furthermore, direct views of this garden's rear garden area would be screened by the trees located down the grass verge adjacent to this property. With regards to numbers 8 to 14 Lundy Close, there is one landing window facing their property that will have obscured glass. With regard to the planting of trees, the trees to be planted are requested by the Council and will be of species recommended by the Council, which we are positive will not have any effect on neighbouring drains or gardens. With regard to disruption caused by construction traffic, when appointing a contractor, we will ensure they provide a construction traffic management plan to minimise any impact to the neighbours. With regard to changes to street scene character, the house is designed to be a replica of neighbouring properties, incorporating all of the same materials. With regard to parking, the development conforms to policy IN14 and the proposal provides the appropriate amount of car and cycle parking. With regard to noise of any additional cars, the development will have zero to minimal impact to neighbouring policies and the ambient noise of the close will not be affected. With regard to concerns over a rising crime due to the proposed development blocking views from neighbouring houses and enclosing the public footpath, there is no evidence to suggest this would be the case and the proposed development would overlook the public footpath. Finally, with regard to restricted access to nearby garages from builder lorries during construction, the construction traffic management plan should alleviate any of these concerns. I understand that this proposal is also supported by Miss S. Hobden of Crawley Borough Council's Planning Department. End of statement number 4. Our final statement on this application comes from Councillor Chris Mullins, Councillor for Gossips Green and North East Broadfield Ward. I have visited the site, which is in my ward, and feel somewhat concerned about this proposal. I think that it has the potential to completely change the balanced design of this residential area. I would make the following points. It will be very close to existing housing. The outlook from the existing houses will drastically change. The new development will overlook the existing houses. In the design proposal, the new house will have windows overlooking these existing houses. The proposal will cause a high-density feeling to the local neighbours. This will change the very nature of a well-designed development. The form of a proposed development should relate to the existing area, and I believe these proposals fail to meet this requirement. As the residential area is now, it is not giving the impression of a high-density building area. The plans before the committee today will change this, forcing what was a side garden into a detached house. Page 25.5.16 states, numbers 8 to 14 would face the gable end of the proposed dwelling, 10.9 metres away. This may comply with the 10.5 metres separation required, but surely separation between two adjacent houses set side by side is a very different consideration to two existing houses suddenly being imposed upon, with a brick wall directly in front of and with windows directly overlooking their living room and bedrooms, thus affecting their privacy and outlook. Overshadowing. Once again, shadowing from a solid building is very different to that of from trees, which vary in the amount of shade left according to the time of year. In conclusion, I feel that this development is an imposition on the present residents. Changing the outlook as it is at present, it would be a downgrade of the existing living environment to its neighbours. I would call on members to request a site visit if this has not already taken place. End of statement 5. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have mentioned the process for consideration of applications. Therefore, we will now begin consideration of the application. Please turn on your camera if you wish to speak.
Councillor Ashcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I know I am one of the ward councillors as well, so I know the area well. I've run around that part of the Broadfield, so I also know, I know the area and how it would affect the houses, particularly, obviously, 8, 10, and 12 and 14, but particularly 8 and 10. I do have concerns about the boundary fence and how that was repositioned. To my knowledge, before that, where there was this, where a public footpath was, that the fencing had to obviously be height, and that if there was shrubbery there, or as it was plants before, that they should really actually have remained for that reason. So I am a bit concerned that that was obviously done, and because I know in other parts of the actual ward where there has been a public footpath before and a fence put up, they've had to take it down because it didn't meet proper regulations. Overall, I'm a bit concerned about the actual the effect it will have on other neighbours. The increased traffic over the public footpath is also a concern to me, because it looks like you can only go in one way or another. You either got to reverse back up onto the driveway, or you've got to reverse off of the driveway over the public footpath, which I know happens in lots of other places, but with the increased amount of traffic, it's say like 4 or 5 cars that will have to be doing that. That doesn't sit well with me. For me personally, I don't feel I can support this because of the effect it will have on the neighbouring houses.
Councillor Jaggard.
Thank you. Yes, I've visited the site. I had a good look round, and I can see that this house has taken a lot of trouble to actually fit in. However, I do have similar concerns to Councillor Ashcroft. I'm very concerned about amenity land being sold. Now, I had no idea that piece of land was much bigger, looking at the plans submitted by the residents there of their original documentation. It was quite a large piece of amenity land, which has been fenced in. And looking on Google Maps, there used to be a really lovely hedge there, which is now gone, and I think the fence has been there. I'm concerned that amenity land, if we did sell it, should have been sold without developmental rights on it. I find that quite surprising. The second thing is the angle from the property at number 6. I thought you had to have a 45-degree angle from the windows, or 60-degree, and you couldn't build within those angles. So I would like that clarified as to why this building is clearly within those angles, light angles, I think they're called, from the windows. So I have concerns about that. And my last concern is the exiting the driveway, reversing out quite a long reverse at a 90-degree bend in it. I'm not quite sure that whether some sort of sweep thing has been looked at, whether cars can actually get out of that angle in that space, because it's right up against the wall of the number 6. So I do have concerns about that as well, and I'd like those questions answered. Thank you.
Councillor Irvine.
Thank you. First of all, there's a point I wish to raise, which I hesitate to do so, but it's a kind of point of order. Councillor Ashcroft was speaking and he stated he was the ward councillor for this area, but I think it's true to say that when we are members of this committee, we're not representing our individual wards, we're representing the town as a whole. And that's not a minor point I'm making, because that is covered in the Code of Conduct on Planning Issues, and I'd like to ask the legal officer to confirm whether I'm correct or incorrect on that point. Secondly, I did take a site visit here. It was very limited because obviously I could only look at the exterior of the site, and from what the planning officer has said and from what the applicants have put forward, I don't think this is an unreasonable proposal, although I do understand how neighbours might be, object to it. But overall, I think I'll be voting in favour of this.
Okay. Could I please ask Anne-Maria Brown to turn her camera on so that she can respond? Thank you, Anne-Maria.
Yes, thank you. Well, Councillor Ashcroft was making a specific comment that this particular property fell within his ward, and I don't see any objection to that.
Okay. If I bring back Councillor Irvine. Okay, Councillor Irvine, would you like to turn your microphone on? Oh. Did you want to respond, Councillor Irvine?
No, I do actually, because I just asked if Mrs. Brown could confirm that it is correct that we sit on this committee as members of the committee looking at the affairs of the town as a whole, rather than representing our individual rules. Is that, am I correct in that?
And Maria, if I just bring you back. Oh, bear with me.
Thank you. All members that sit on the planning committee will have a number of planning applications that are before them across the town as a whole. And I mean, it's quite reasonable that a member may mention the fact that the application is in either her or his ward. And I don't feel that Councillor Ashcroft has said anything unusual in that regard. All members are there to consider planning applications appropriately, to consider them in light of the development plan and all material planning considerations, and I'm sure all members do that, and I'm sure that Councillor Ashcroft tonight will consider that planning application appropriately. Thank you.
Okay, I can see that Councillor Ashcroft has his camera on. Would you like to speak?
Yes, yes, thank you. I just wanted to come back and thank you very much for Anne-Maria. It was more to highlight that I am a ward member for this particular ward. It doesn't have any bearings on how I will vote for or against the proposal. It's just highlighting that I know the area, I know the patch. I am a ward representative. It's what I say at the beginning when I mention my interests. But we as members of the council, it's a non-political committee, and that's why we say at the start of the meeting which ward we represent. Otherwise, what's the point of saying that if we wouldn't mention it any other time? But thank you.
Okay, I have no further requests to speak, so I'm going to bring Hamish back to respond to any comments.
Thank you. So there's a few questions to answer there. Sorry, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
I've got a network quality message anyway. Hopefully you can see that plan. So dealing first with the amenity land issue. The area that has been enclosed recently is a fairly narrow, probably a metre and a half strip running along this boundary. And there were previously a row of conifer trees along there. They seem to be maintained at quite a low height of about 2.5 metres, so they're more of a hedge really, although they probably were trees. They have been removed. As I said earlier, I don't know when that happened, but the Google Maps certainly show the current fence in position a year ago, so it was some time before that. There is now a fence enclosing that area of land. Now, I have looked back through the planning history of the site and also used the council's aerial photographs. Certainly as far back as 2001, which is the earliest I could go in terms of aerial photographs without the image becoming so blurred that you couldn't make it out. Certainly back to 2001, the area seems to have formed, seems to have been in that same relationship with the trees along the boundary and as part of the garden of number 6. So I think the plan that was shown earlier that showed a larger area of amenity land, that may well have been the way the estate was originally intended to be laid out, but I couldn't find any evidence that that actually ever happened. I don't know about any gradual encroachment and enclosure by fences, but if that has happened, it certainly seems to have happened longer ago than 4 years ago. So it would have become, the fences would have become lawful. So I think the only potential issue is the fairly narrow strip along here, which has obviously probably been enclosed fairly recently. I would think certainly within the last 4 years. The land has never been council owned as far as I can tell. It doesn't show on our mapping records as being ever owned by this council. The plans, our maps show the adopted highway, so the public footpath here and to the rear is adopted public highway, but it doesn't appear as though either the county council or the borough council have ever owned any of this piece of land here. So as I say, it's possible at the time the estate was originally laid out that it may have been intended to be some kind of amenity land. I don't know whether it ever served that function, but certainly in recent years, at most the area along here where there was previously a fence set back along here, at most that area performed something of that function. I think it would be difficult to say that that was a loss of amenity land, and as I said, the land it's not council owned. It appears to be within the applicant's ownership. Then the two other questions. One was about the angle from the rear windows of number 6. So the angles out here. Clearly the new dwelling does break both the 45-degree line and the 60-degree line that we would normally apply as a test. That issue is actually picked up in the report in paragraph 5.14. And it does recognise that it would encroach into that 60-degree area, but it's felt to be an acceptable relationship, partly because of the separation distance. So the houses are about 3.5 metres away from each other, or would be 3.5 metres away from each other. Obviously the proposed house is also to the northwest of the existing house, so in terms of sunlight that would come round here, there's no overshadowing impact on the remaining rear garden or the rear windows of number 6. And as I said in my presentation, that kind of staggered building line is not that uncommon in an urban area where houses are often not necessarily along a straight building line. So we did feel, for the reasons set out in that paragraph, that the relationship is acceptable. Then in terms of the driveway, I certainly would accept that the manoeuvring arrangements are slightly complex to get in and out of the drive. It would be a driveway shared by 2 houses, and you've got vehicles coming in effectively from 3 directions onto the access point. But we would take the lead from the County Council Highway Authority in these matters, and they haven't raised any objection. They're happy that the layout is acceptable. And although we don't have a tracking diagram here, I think there does appear to be sufficient space in this area for vehicles to manoeuvre in, probably to reverse out onto the highway, but that is an existing situation, and I think the Highway Authority, they have no record of any accidents along this road. It's a residential cul-de-sac. I don't think they feel that the risk is particularly significant. I think that covers all the questions that were raised. Thank you.
Okay, we have no councillors indicating a wish to speak, so over to you, Chair.
Thank you. All committee members have had the opportunity to speak, so we will move on to the vote. A recorded vote on the application will be taken by the Democratic Services Officer on behalf of the Chair. Members of the committee will be called upon to vote in alphabetical order. Once you are live, please unmute your microphone, ensure your camera is on, and state whether you are for or against the recommendation, or if you abstain. The recommendation is to permit. I will move the recommendation. Can I ask the Vice Chair to please second the recommendation?
I second the recommendation. I'll second it.
Thank you. Will the Democratic Services Officer please conduct the recorded vote?
Okay, this is a recorded vote being taken on agenda item 6, CR 2020 0020 FUL 6 Lundy Close, Broadfield. Committee members are asked to vote for or against the recommendation before them, or by way of abstention. Please ensure that your video feed is live before declaring your vote. Councillor Ashkoff.
Against.
Councillor Belbin.
For.
Councillor Hart.
For.
Sorry, bear with me. Could Councillor Irvine please put on his camera?
It should be on now.
Okay, thank you.
For.
Councillor Jaggard.
For.
Councillor Jahans.
For.
Councillor Malik.
For.
Councillor McAlaney.
For.
Councillor McGarley, could you please put your camera on?
For.
Sorry, could you please, nope, please state that again now your camera's on.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Purdy.
For.
And Councillor Smith.
For.
Okay, the vote has been taken with, the vote has been taken with 10 votes for, 1 vote against and no abstentions on the recommendation.
Thank you. So the application CR 2020 0020 FUL 6 Lundy Close, Broadfield, Crawley has been permitted, subject to the conditions set out in the report. Moving on to our next item on the agenda, item number 7 is planning application CR 2020 0054 FUL 9 Mill Road, 3 Bridges, Crawley. Please, can I ask the planning officer to introduce themselves and to present the report to the committee?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Val Cheeseman, Principal Planning Officer. I'll just run through the slideshow and the plans. This is the location plan for the site. which is in Mill Road in Three Bridges, and to the north is Hazelwick Road. This is Mill Road, and at the bottom is New Street. Turning to the block plan. First of all, the existing situation. This is the semi-detached property as existing, with the side garden area with a garage shown. Then the proposal is for an extension to the property to form additional living accommodation for that property in a mirror image of the existing form. And you will also see the relationship with the surrounding properties. So the existing house number 9 is here, then 8, 10 and 12 on the other side of Mill Road, and then Millbrook House and the other properties in Hazelwick Road. Apologies, just waiting for the plan to load. This is the existing layout of the premises. So semi-detached house with accommodation over 2 floors. So the main 2-storey part here with outshot to the rear, part 2-storey, part single-storey. And then moving to the existing elevations. So this is the front of the property. I'll just zoom in there. Front of the property, and you'll see the detailing shown, which is the decorative brickwork around the doors and the windows and on the corner of the house and the chimney. It shows the existing garage and fence that would come down as part of this proposal. So moving to the proposal. So the application is for an extension to the side and rear. So zooming in there, so it's this part here. So on the ground floor, that would be enlarged dining room, living room, utility room at ground floor. On the first floor, we would have 2 additional bedrooms and bathrooms. And you can see from this plan that the single-storey element would be flat roofed. Just waiting for the elevations to come up. So from the front, it would be a mirror image of the existing property, picking up on the detailing. So the window styles, the brick detailing around the windows and on the corner, and the doorway. The chimney stack would be replicated, so there's similar design. The pitch of the roof and the height of the ridge would be maintained. And then to the rear, you can see the 2-storey outshot to the rear, picking up on the feature on the existing property, and then the single-storey element. And then just moving across to the side elevation. So the main part of the proposal there, then the 2-storey part where it projects out the rear, slept down from the main ridge, and then the single-storey element to the rear of that. And then we have a street scene elevation. Has been prepared before and after. So at the moment, there's the subject property, one half of a semi with the garage, and then this is Millbrook House, and that's its parking area and patio area. And then this is the proposal. So this is the extension to the house, and you can see how that would replicate the design of the other dwellings. And then some photographs. So this is the front of the property from Mill Road, and also the side elevation, and you can see the design and the sort of detailing that I've referred to, in particular the brickwork and the window types. And you can see the top of the garage there at the moment. Then this is a view of the side, bit more detail there, and then you can see the existing two-storey projection to the rear, and you can see the parking area of Millbrook House, just on which abuts the boundary of the site. And this photograph is again to the side, showing the parking area, but also showing to the rear of the site. And then the final photograph, it is a side view, again from that parking area, but you can also then see the properties on the other side of the road. So that's number 8, number 10 and number 12. I'll just go back to the block plan. Just to pick up on a couple of issues to clarify those. You'll see from the report that a previous application was refused on this site. That was for a new separate dwelling in this position, but the circumstances of that were that at the time the site was classified as being in flood zone 3A, and also for that application for a new dwelling, the application hadn't passed the relevant tests to satisfy us with regard to flood risk, and so the application was refused for those reasons. The difference with that and the current application is this is now for an extension to the existing dwelling. Further development is that the site is now classed as being in flood zone 2. In those circumstances, as it's an extension to an existing dwelling, it's classed as minor development when looking at flood risk. And so those tests about the sequential and the exceptions test don't apply. Whilst the use of the site for residential remains at the more vulnerable category, because that's its classification, as it's in flood zone 2, in those circumstances, development is appropriate for an extension, for a domestic extension, and in those circumstances, developments have to follow the Environment Agency's standing advice, which relate to floor levels, including flood resilient measures and having safe access and egress for in the event of a flood, and in particular having no ground floor sleeping accommodation. As the report sets out, those matters have been taken into account in the application. There is a flood risk assessment associated with the application, and it is proposed that those matters be conditioned to control them. So the initial concerns with the previous application have been overcome because this is an extension and not a new dwelling, and so it's a different set of circumstances. Another element I'd just like to clarify is regard to parking. A particular number of concerns have been raised in that regard. The standard requirement, or parking standard requirement for the property would be 2 to 3 spaces, and that would be the same for the existing house and also with the extension. As a result of this application, the garage would be removed because the extension's going in that place, and also the hard standing of the car parking area will also be taken up. We just go to the existing block plan, you can see there's the garage there with a driveway. Well, that area would now be taken up with the extension. You can see here. West Sussex County Council's Highway Authority have no highway safety objections. Whilst there would be a 2 to 3 space shortfall, they would said that it wouldn't substantiate a highway safety issue, and they also comment that the site is in a sustainable location. In terms of the local parking situation, the site is in a controlled parking zone, but from investigations and a number of site visits, both with the previous application and with this application, there has been capacity for car parking along Mill Road, both when in operation, when the controlled parking zone is in operation, which is 9 AM to 5 PM Mondays to Saturdays, and also when it's not in operation, when there is no control over parking, which would be evenings and Sundays, and it was felt that there is capacity available in the locality. And the application would not reduce the number of on-street spaces. So the officer of view that there is sufficient capacity to meet the demand created by this extension, and it would not make it materially worse. A further factor is the sustainable location of the dwelling. And then a final point to comment on is the design. Whilst it is a large extension, it was felt that it picks up on the detailing and the scale and proportion of the existing dwellings in the locality. Bearing in mind it's within the conservation area, it was felt that that was the right design approach to follow. And you can see the front elevation on the screen there. And if we just go back to the block plan, and zooming in, you will see that on the opposite side of the road there's a terrace of 3 dwellings, so it felt it would pick up on that character of built form in the locality. Recommendation is to grant permission subject to the conditions as set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any statements submitted by members of the public?
There have been 5 statements submitted regarding this planning application. Again, I'll be reading them in the order outlined in the Council's constitution. Our first statement is from Mr. A. Bain, a neighbour of 9 Mill Road. Thank you for the opportunity to share a statement on this application. I believe this proposed plan places at risk the historic character of the road I live in and the well-being of its residents. In the unusual times we are in, I do not expect the committee to know or have been able to visit my street. Mill Road is, in effect, a small country lane to a watermill. Built at the turn of the 20th century, it is a rare link to Crawley's pre-Newtown past, but also something with constraints that would not occur in a modern road. My street is one way with no room for a footpath and has limited on-street parking, which is also used by residents on the adjacent streets, New Street and Hazelwick Road. Such is the character and history of where we live, it is one of the small areas of our town that has been made a conservation area. Such is the pressure on parking, it is not only part of the permit parking area, but is in a part of the permit parking area where permission had to be extended to 6 days a week. Even then, it is somewhere where parking can be very hard, particularly at evenings and weekends. I ask that you please take the situation into consideration in forming your opinions on this application, something with very different and specific concerns to what we would typically see in our town. However sensitively this new extension is built, it will stand out as vastly different to its surroundings. I note that the Conservation Area Committee and Councillor Peter Lamb are also of this opinion and have raised objections to this plan for this reason. And it is likely to result in higher pressure on parking and surrounding infrastructure while removing parking spaces from our road. I also have concerns with the impact of this development while in progress on the safety and day-to-day being of residents. This application seems to have no clear plan for how the site will be managed, for example, for the setting up of scaffolding, which presumably would have to go outside the area of the plot, and the delivery and storage of building materials. I think we can agree that it is better to plan for this up front rather than face scenarios of damage to cars or other properties, a risk of pedestrians coming to harm's way, or an inability for emergency services to access vulnerable residents. Finally, the application to extend number 9 Mill Road is the third such application for development, and you will see it has raised a lot of comments and concerns from local residents and businesses every time it has been raised. In this time, the house has been lived in by a number of short-term renters, and previous applications have been for an additional infill property, which I am led to believe will be of greater market value. I note this application is different. It is for an extension, and as a result, the planning report says it has been treated differently. From my layman's opinion, looking at the plans, this submission as an extension seems an attempt to game the planning system to more easily achieve a favourable outcome, e.g. require a lower threshold for flood risk. Certainly this is not an extension to improve the quality of life of a long-term existing resident, e.g. a family who requires more space, and the layout of the plans look very well suited to be easily converted into 2 houses at a later date. I ask you to please consider this in your thinking. End of statement 1. Statement 2 has been submitted by Ms N Edwards, also a neighbour of 9 Mill Road. Number 1. Conservation Area. The area impacted by the application of Mill Road is part of the Crawley Conservation Area identified in Policy CH12. The current application undermines and conflicts with the Conservation Area document implemented by Crawley Borough Council, and therefore permitting the aforementioned application sets a precedence that further applications made in conflict with the conservation document will be accepted, thus rendering the conservation area protection useless. The current application extends a 2-bedroom Edwardian building erected in 1903, part of 5 identical dwellings which are part of the original heritage of Crawley, into a 4-bedroom property. Failing to upkeep the historical value of the area and undermining previously rejected applications in the area which are conflicted with these terms. The application is in conflict with the terms outlined in the policy, including, but not limited to, preserve and, where possible, enhance its special Victorian Edwardian era character and appearance. Protect the conservation area from development which would be out of scale, character and appearance with the area. Retain buildings and other features which contribute to the character and appearance of the conservation area. Retain features that have a historic association with the expansion of 3 bridges and construction of the railway. Promote environmental enhancements within the conservation area that are consistent with its character. Permitting the current application would therefore bring into question previous applications which have been declined and future applications which conflict with the policy. 2. Design, character and appearance. Under the Local Development Framework, Saved Local Plan 2000, Policy BN2, it states that policy seeks to preserve or enhance the character and appearance of conservation areas. The plans for a new build 4-bedroom property to be placed within the boundaries of 9 Mill Road are therefore out of character and disproportionate to the existing 2-bedroom properties in the existing terrace and the surrounding houses, and contravene this. Furthermore, the National Planning Policy Framework 2012, paragraph 132, highlights the importance of considering the significance of the heritage asset and that any harm or loss should require clear and convincing justification. The addition of a new build property to 1900 period properties would thus create a loss of historic value and heritage to Mill Road. There are no new build properties in this area or through New Street and the Hazelwick Road which adjoins the section of Mill Road affected. The area is a conservation area and it should thus be protected from removing the traditional aspects of Mill Road. It is not of appropriate appearance compared with the development of the area from the 1900s. Regardless of sourcing traditional materials, the erection of a new house will directly impact the historic character, design and appearance of the current houses. 3. Noise and disturbance. The area of Mill Road subject to the development is a one-way system with no installed footpaths or walkways. In addition, it is a route used by residents to access the local nursery, Daisy Chain, and 2 local schools, Three Bridges Infants and Juniors, as well as students for Hazelwick and Oriel secondary schools. The already limited area means that the cars parked in the area are frequently damaged and that large vehicles obstruct the road. The planning has failed to make provision for storage of materials, work vans and obstructions which will cause excessive noise and disturbance to the current residents, including obstructing use of vehicles and entry to the properties of those residents in Mill Road. In addition, this will directly impact the safety of vehicles leaving Millbrook House, adjacent to 9 Mill Road, and the parking of 28 Hazelwick Road, which is located on Mill Road. 4. Highway safety and traffic issues. Immediately between 7 and 9 Mill Road is a fire hydrant. The size and impact of the development fails to make provision for materials, work vans and obstruction. The present plans would mean that the materials were stored in the road outside the house, blocking the access to the hydrant. In addition, during the lockdown period alone, no less than 4 ambulances have attended properties within Mill Road to attend to the needs of elderly residents requiring hospital care, obstructing the road for up to 45 minutes at a time. The road has no footpaths and the permit parking in place is currently limited to only 7 spaces, 6 of which are utilised by residents, allowing no safe space to park. The impact of work vehicles, materials and ongoing building work will detrimentally impact the safety of pedestrians, residents and road users. 5. Previous application. The previous application, made in 2019, was declined for the impact on flooding and drainage. The new application is of equal size and impact on the local area to this application, and as such, no provision has been made to lessen the impact. End of Statement 2. Statement 3 has been submitted by the agent for this application, Architecture for London. The proposal will provide a much improved dwelling that is in keeping with the conservation area. It is in a sustainable location and the work will support local employment. In summary, the application is similar to the previously submitted scheme, which was refused for only 2 reasons. The first issue was flood risk, which has now been addressed, and the second issue related to affordable housing, which is no longer relevant. All issues raised by the Council have been addressed, and we thank the Council for their continued positive, active engagement, especially during the recent COVID restrictions. End of Statement 3. Statement number 4 on this application has been submitted by Councillor Brenda Burgess, Crawley Borough Council Ward Councillor for Three Bridges, and West Sussex County Councillor for Three Bridges and Pound Hill South. Thank you for allowing me to speak on 9 Mill Road. I formally object to this application. With this proposed extension, the 2 properties already there will look like a terraced row of 3 houses, especially as the proposed extension is to have its own front door and be dominant in size to both number 9 and number 7. This will surely affect the street scene, traffic, parking and character. Yet, relating to household extensions, CBC has adopted the Urban Design Supplementary Document 2016. This supplements the Crawley Borough Local Plan 2015 to 2030. This document provides information for householder developments. It states, alterations to the exterior of a building can have serious impacts on neighbour amenity, on the immediate street scene and on the surrounding area. Important aspects of such a design include the scale of the alteration, the materials proposed and the impact to both the local community and the public realm. Further specific guidance in relation to the front, side and rear extensions, state that extensions and porches should be subservient to the rest of the original house. It needs to appear that such an extension is an add-on and should not extend flush with the adjoining property, creating one continuous width across the whole of the frontage. In other words, the extension should be laid back, probably not so high as the main property, and look as though it has been added on. Good design includes the scale of the alteration in relation to the main property, which is in this case a house situated in a conservation area and of historical value, built when the railways first came to Crawley and over 100 years old. I question why such a document, such as the Urban Design Document 2016, appears to have been dismissed in this case. Applications for extensions are taken on their own merit. However, that is not what is said in the document, which clearly states, even small alterations can have a serious impact on the locality. This is not a small extension. Extensions need to be subservient. This application flouts the rules. Are you going to allow that? Should number 9 have an extension at all? This proposed extension will remove the present garage and parking area of number 9. So, if passed, where would occupants park? May I remind you, number 9 stands on a very narrow one-way street with access from New Street, existing in Hazelwick Road. To sum up, the proposed extension will change the character of an historic house, change the size of the dwelling to an overpowering building, change the character of a small road, change the character of the conservation area, fought for by residents. Why have such an area if it is to be ignored? Change the parking needs, and change the safe access for pedestrians and cyclists. These are too many changes. If allowed, what would have been gained? 2 extra bedrooms and a slightly larger living space. I ask you, is that a good enough exchange for the area, the road, and most of all, my residents? I wholeheartedly oppose this application, and I hope you do too. Thank you. End of statement number 4. Our 5th and final statement on this application comes from Councillor Bob Burgess, Ward Councillor for Three Bridges Ward. Good evening. I'm objecting to the application that is proposed for 9 Mill Road. There are several reasons. The proposed extension has its own front door. This is most unusual. One has to ask what is the reason for this departure from the norm. Conjecture could suggest that at some time in the future an application could be submitted so that this current application for an extension is changed into an application for a separate dwelling, i.e. another house. The site sits within a conservation area. The properties in the local vicinity were erected over 100 years ago, and so any additions, alterations or changes need to be sympathetic to the heritage of the area. Because of its position within a conservation area, extra consideration needs to be given to anything which may alter the area made up as it is, of Victorian and Edwardian properties in any way. The section of Mill Road where 9 Mill Road sits is a small one-way street with parking for 7 vehicles on the south side of the road. In addition, there is no pavement on either side of the road. The parking spaces are regularly occupied throughout the day, and particularly during the evening and night time, being used by residents of both New Street and Hazelwick Road. The loss of 2 parking spaces currently at 9 Mill Road would mean that parking for vehicles which normally use that site would have to be elsewhere. In previous applications, one of the reasons for rejection concerned flooding. It mentions on page 35, paragraph 3.1, section 1, that the applicant has not taken a risk-based approach to avoid, where possible, flood risk to people and to property. It is in an inappropriate location. But now, because an extension is proposed, different criteria apply. Any extension is classed as a minor development. The proposed extension does not seem to be minor in any way. If you look at the proposed front elevation, it is wider than the existing front elevation. The officer recommendation to approve mentions on page 43, paragraph 5.33 that the proposal does not meet the Borough Council's indicative parking standards, but goes on to justify the reduction in capacity. How does this make sense? What is the point of having standards if they are going to be ignored? I would urge you to refuse this application. Thank you. End of statement 5. And that's all the statements that have been submitted on this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We will now begin consideration of the application. Please turn on your camera if you wish to speak.
Councillor Belbin. Sorry, please turn your microphone on, Councillor Belbin. Thank you.
Apologies. Thank you. Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank the officers, because this one has been going for some time. There's been more than one officer involved in this, and it's a long protracted thing, which I hope is finally going to come to some sort of conclusion. I, for one, I'm very much in favour, as I mentioned before, to this committee, but I'm in favour of aspirational homes, bigger homes, which we don't seem to be building too many of. But this one clearly is in the wrong place. When this is basically just a collection of, it's quaint railway cottages, and building a 4-bedroom home just would not fit. I'll have a question, please, Val, if you'd be so kind. It relates to a flood risks, which I notice is now moved down to flood zone 2 from 3A. Paragraph 5.4 says that different criteria apply for extensions. My question, Val, if you'd be so kind, as the look and feel of both the extension and the previously refused dwelling are almost identical, had this been an application for a dwelling, would that have been refused given the revised flood zone? The only observation I really want to make at this stage relates to parking. In paragraph 5.31 says it won't make it any materially worse. Well, as many have mentioned, limited parking in this one-way street, and you may have spotted in the photograph double yellow lines just outside the property concerned. I take the point that if the CPZ is well managed during the time that the CPZ is in effect, but when I was there yesterday morning, there was very, very little, if any, capacity for cars to park on a Sunday morning in the neighbouring New Street and Hazelwick Road. That's all I wish to say at this current stage. Thank you very much, Chair.
Councillor Jaggard.
Thank you. I do have concerns, and I agree with what's been said in many cases. A minor extension, this isn't a minor extension. It's actually, I've looked and I've measured, and it is bigger than the original house. I don't see how you can have an extension that is bigger than the original house. And that, I appreciate that it does look nice as a terrace, but in fact it is basically another house they're building, and I'm quite sure that at some point in the future this extension will become another house. My question is, I went onto the Environment Agency website and typed in the exact address of this property, and it still came up as a flood zone 3, as high risk, and it's well within, clearly showing within zone 3 of the flood risk. So I'm really confused as to how we've come to the conclusion that it's now been downgraded to flood risk 2 when it's this morning still 3 on the Environment Agency website. So I'd just like that cleared up, please.
Councillor Ashcroft.
Thank you. Following other several comments as well, I do have concerns about this application, primarily because of the change, the nature of the scene, in that the conservation areas are there for a reason, and I feel this is too great a move for my liking. But also, I'm very it is a big extension in that it's bigger than the original property, which seems a bit strange for an extension. It also seems a bit strange to have 2 front doors on an extension. Not that that's, I don't think, a thing. One question I do have, there's obviously going to be, from what I can see of the plans now, no access to the rear of the property. And I wondered how that's going to, if that affects anything, because as I say, in terms of actually gaining any access to the rear, there won't be, because the looks like from the plans it butts right up against the boundary fence.
Councillor Purdy.
Thank you very much. I won't repeat previous comments suffice to say, at the moment, I'm not minded to approve this proposal because of its size, because of its overbearing nature. I would like to make a couple of observations should the committee decide to approve this. In paragraph 514, there's a note that a condition could be attached to permissions about specification of materials and detailing. I believe that such a condition should be made. Similarly, in paragraph 516, a condition is recommended to require the details of the window joinery to be approved. Once again, I would consider that such a condition should be made, should this item be approved. I'm also then spreading into territory that I don't know the answer to, as to whether or not a condition could be applied as to not permitting the property to be split into two at a future date, because this does look like another house. And when I look at the frontal elevation, that looks reasonable in keeping with the street and the houses opposite. When I look at the rear elevation with its pair of first floor single story extensions that come out sort of like the letter H, each with its own French window, that feels very much like two houses. And if we can't control that, then I would at least like to have that recorded in the minutes. Again, should this be approved, my position is that I will not be voting for it. One final observation, which is comments have been made about the street, the ability to build, and where do you put things around the front. If you look up, you can see another hazard that would have to be addressed. There's a 4-wire overhead electricity supply, which would almost certainly need to be diverted prior to putting any scaffolding up, and that will create more issues down the road. I will just pick up one final point, which is parking. I note the comments from West Sussex Highways Authority, and I appreciate that when officers have been out to visit, they will have seen that the parking looks okay. That's not the message that comes back to me from residents around that area and in the conservation area in particular. And this proposal is losing 3 off-road parking spaces for pushing all the vehicles from that new 4-bedroom house out onto the road. Thank you.
Councillor Smith, if you could just unmute your microphone, please.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yes, I know this location. It is a very narrow road there, I know, but it could hardly be in a more sustainable location. It's a few steps to the taxi ranks and to Three Bridges station, and of course a whole range of buses pass there as well. It's clear that the designers, the architects, have been at pains to make this extension look in keeping with the surrounding properties, and it's difficult to conceive how they could have been more successful in that, because it looks exactly like another house next to the existing one, albeit it's now an extension. I do have sympathy with the loss of 3 spaces, parking spaces. I think parking is a problem everywhere we go, but so is housing, and it does seem to me that this is a reasonable application, and I think I'm going to be supporting it.
Councillor Irvine.
Thank you, Chair. I kind of have 2 minds about this, because I can see where the residents are coming from. It is a narrow road, and there would be issues, could be issues with parking and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, from what I've seen and what's been described, it sounds to me like this development could actually improve the appearance of Mill Road a little bit. And I mean, all the time I've been on this committee has always taken a very pragmatic approach to development in Crawley. I think this time, this is an instance where we need a bit of pragmatism, because it's all very well saying it's in a conservation area, and the conservation area needs to be preserved. But if a conservation area can be improved in any way, then we obviously ought to go for it. And I really can't see any reason not to vote in favour of it.
Okay, can I please ask the planning officer to turn her camera on so that I can bring her back in? Lovely, thank you, Val.
Thank you. Just turn to the elevations. First of all, taking up the points about the size and the design of the proposal, the midpoint of the or the extension is halfway through the chimney line. So that's the line of the existing, and then that's the proposal. And as stated before, it's a mirror image of the existing house. In scale terms, whilst it is large, it was felt that this was the appropriate approach to take, because it would allow for those features to be replicated, and if you had a set down or a set back, that might not work in design terms, because the pair of semis and the terrace opposite are quite a sort of composite whole with none of those features. So it was felt that this picked up on those features that are seen in the locality. And the SPD refers to good design relating to the character and style, materials and finishes, and the character of the neighbourhood. And yes, the site is in a conservation area, but that doesn't mean that no development can take place. It just requires that development should have regard to that character and pick up on the elements that are important and define the character of the locality. And for example, in this case, in particular, is the scale of the houses, and the detailing to the properties. We'll go to the location plan. Just draw that a bit larger. With regard to the flooding questions, we had gone back to the Environment Agency to clarify their comments and to ask them about the proposal, particularly in the light that our drainage engineer did not object to the application. Initially, the Environment Agency had objected. As a result of that, they had then gone and looked at their data relating to flooding, and they confirmed it was within flood zone 2. So that is the response we have had from the Environment Agency. With regard to the point about this being in a revised flood zone, but if it was a dwelling, in that case, the applicant would need to go through the flood risk assessment process, and they would still need to do the sequential steps and the exception test. But because this application is for an extension to a dwelling, it doesn't need to go through those criteria. Sorry, going back to the point about the detailing and the conditions that was made by Councillor Purdy. In the recommendation, we have suggested 2 conditions that would cover that. Condition 4 relates to the materials and the detailing of the brickwork, and condition 5 relates to the window joinery and the design and the method of opening. So that those would cover those 2 aspects. With regard to the comment about could we impose a condition to prevent the extension being, or the premises being split into 2 at a later date. The application is for an extension to the existing dwelling. It's not to propose a separate dwelling, and so the lawful use of the premises would be as 1 dwelling house. Were it to be split into 2 at a later date, that would be a breach of planning control, and we could take action if it was expedient to do so. So it would not be appropriate to put a condition on, because there's no need. There are controls, enforcement and controls available should a breach occur. With regard to the overhead line and needing to be diverted, that would be a separate matter for the applicant or the developer or the applicant's builder to resolve. It wouldn't be a matter that we could deal with by planning conditions. It's dealt with by other legislation. With regard to parking, yes, parking is limited in the locality, but from the assessment that we had done and with the earlier application, that was in pre-COVID-19 times, and at that point when traffic levels and parking were at that particular levels, it was felt that there was capacity in the locality. I think that's covered everything. Thank you.
Okay, there appears to be nobody else wishing to speak, so I'll pass over to you, Chair.
Thank you. All committee members have had the opportunity to speak, so we will now move on to the vote. A recorded vote on the application will be taken by a Democratic Services Officer on behalf of the Chair. Members of the committee will be called upon to vote in alphabetical order. Once you are live, please unmute your microphone, ensure your camera is on, state whether you are for or against the recommendation, or if you abstain. Now the recommendation is to permit. I will move the recommendation. Can I ask the Vice Chair to please second the recommendation?
Councillor McAlaney, could you please turn your camera on? Thank you.
I second that recommendation. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Will the Democratic Services Officer please conduct the recorded vote?
Okay, this is a recorded vote being taken on agenda item 7, CR 2020-0054 FUL for 9 Mill Road in Three Bridges. Committee members are asked to vote for or against the recommendation before them, or by way of abstention. Please ensure that your video feed is live before declaring your vote. Councillor Ashcroft.
Against.
Councillor Belbin.
Against.
Councillor Hart.
For.
Apologies, bear with me. Councillor Irvine. Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yep. For.
Councillor Jaggard.
Against.
Councillor Jahans.
4.
Councillor Malik.
4.
Councillor McAlaney.
4.
Councillor Magali.
Against.
Councillor Purdy.
Against.
And Councillor Peter Smith.
4.
Okay, bear with me one moment. Okay, the vote has been taken with 6 votes for and 5 votes against, with 0 abstentions on the recommendation.
Thank you. So the application, planning application CR 2020-0054 FUL 9 Mill Road, 3 Bridges, Crawley has been permitted, subject to the conditions set out in the report. We do not have any supplemental agenda. So with the business of the planning committee meeting of the 29th June 2020 concluded, the meeting is now closed at 29:36 hours. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shazad.